Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Edward.
Hello, Clifford.
Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you too.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I think in the next few minutes we should be able to start.
That's perfectly fine. Let me know when we're ready and everybody's with us and we can kick it off.
That's fine. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Clifford Onyike. I'm the head of strategy for MACTE. I want to welcome you to this webinar this afternoon. Please be ready to hear what is important to you in order to drive efficiency in your team during this time. If you are a team leader and you want to optimize the performance of your team members, this is quite handy. If you want a positive shift in your production possibility curve, look no further but this. The learning outcome here is one capable of equipping you to achieve your desired result even more in this period. That being said, please join me to welcome our facilitator today. His name is Mr. Edward Marty. He's a keynote speaker and an international partner. He is also the managing partner of CCM with offices in Dubai, US, Canada. Mr. Edward, please, you can take over the stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clifford. Good afternoon to everybody that's joining us today. I see quite a few people on the call. We are very delighted to be with you in such difficult times, obviously, and more challenging than normal for a lot of us. So I am very thankful for the team at MACTE Consulting for putting this together and try to reach as many people as possible. And hopefully that you will have a few takeaways from today's topic on leading virtual teams. And this is a very timely topic because for most of us, this is not something that comes normal. It's not a typical workday for a lot of us. And we have been thrust into this and we have to succeed at any cost almost in making this happen. Now, before I go any further, I just want to go through some reminders for the session today with regards to how it will run and the expectations that we have. The length of the session itself is 45 minutes. We will be opening it up to questions and answers at the end of that for roughly 15 minutes. I will explain a little bit more about that when we get to Q&A, but there will be two ways that you can submit your questions, either through the chat box, which many of you are already using, or you can raise your hand and Yoshi Taka from our team, who is the producer on the call today, will allow you to speak at that point in time and you can ask the question directly. I also want to remind you that you can continue to submit questions as we go along, and certainly if we can get to them at the end of this call, we most certainly would. Another reminder is that we are recording this session, and the recording will be shared afterwards with all of you that joined us on this call. And one more piece that will be shared with you will be our top tips booklet, which is a bit of a summary of this discussion and webinar, and a great reminder post-session for you if you need to refer back to it for any reason. Now, when I talk about virtual teams, for any of you that have been working at home and from some of you that have contacted MACTE before that, it seems like you had to set up Office rather quickly. And for some of you, your office might actually be looking like this right now. And for those of you that tell me, Edward, I'm quite digital, my office would never look like this. If your screen that you're staring at looks like this, it's no better. So the reality is we are, as creatures of habit, we tend to pile up things. We tend to like routine and do things a certain way. And the fact of the matter is the world around us has changed and we have to act accordingly. This new world that we're in today has created a bit of a state of confusion for us as leaders as much as for our team members. There's a lack of time, it seems. So as much as people are working from home and we feel that maybe we are on our own time, we seem to lack it. And we hear constantly from people telling us, I simply don't know where the day goes by the end of it, and I still have tasks to get done. Furthermore, we seem to be juggling multiple tasks. We're stepping out of our comfort zone. We're doing things that maybe we weren't used to doing so. And we've moved from a paper-based environment to a highly digital one in order to be able to get through the times and the work from home scenario for many people. We're also dealing with concerns, both, of course, our own and others within our teams and in our organizations. And we have to juggle that just as much as we're juggling our day-to-day requirements. And last but not least, there's a sense of this notion that we're losing control. And in a virtual environment, that's probably more than ever the truer fact. Already we knew that in office environments, when we were there might have been constantly this state of confusion and departmental biases, and maybe we fight one another, and we refer to it as the war zone. Today, the war zone is even more invisible when we've got various departments in different parts of the country, in different parts of the city, and working from home. That the situation is further exasperated at that point in time. So obviously, as leaders, we have to recognize that while we might have been considered a football team with one direction, one objective, today we might be looking like a team of footballers. Everybody on an individualistic level, they're operating to get through their day, their tasks, and maybe not engaging with a team dynamic. And that's where we differentiate between what we call a football team versus a team of footballers. So we've almost regressed in our ability to manage our teams and our people, and we have to deal with that. So over the course of the next 30, 40 minutes, I'm going to take you through what we refer to as how do we lead virtual teams. And I'll be very honest, it does start with us as leaders. It's not with our teams, and we cannot ask of them what we cannot ask of ourselves. And that means leading by examples. It's our habits that will determine how the team gets through this time and manage to succeed in effectiveness. So while we, excuse me, we may not be physically there, I can assure you they can still see us in a virtual world. And we have to be very careful, and we must lead by example. There's a sense of self-motivation that's required. We have to be able to find the fire within us and stay motivated in order to pass that hope that our team is counting on from us on a continual basis. A third element that we have to remember is calendar sharing. For those of you that are not aware of this or do not utilize this, now more than ever, there's a need for us to make sure that there's full transparency, that I can share whether you use Gmail or you use Outlook, Microsoft Outlook and Exchange. The ability to share our calendars is there, and we should be doing that with our team and vice versa, so everybody knows what the other is doing. This is the time for it to come together and feel that that sharing of information is a top priority. Personal time is just as important. I think for a lot of us, the leaders certainly that we're talking to, that we recognize that their days are starting early and they're ending later, and there's very little personal time that's there, and we need to keep that balance to recharge. We also have to build a collaborative ecosystem. So using platforms such as Team, group WhatsApps, anything of the sort, even Zoom calling like we're doing right now, find a platform that works for you and make sure that you maintain that ecosystem, that you are one team and working together. And last but not least on this element here, I want to talk about time management. I often equate time to money, and it's exactly what it is. And we simply don't throw money around like we do our time. Could you have a few minutes here? Can I take 5 minutes of your time? And it takes 10 minutes and 30 and 40 and 50 minutes of our time. We have to be much more mindful of that and maybe a little bit more stingy with our time and manage it reasonably as we talk about all of these. These 6 elements are for us as leaders, and we have to present these by example in order to be able to lead the team further. And when it comes to leadership dynamics, we have to understand what's our style as a leader. For some of us, we demand full freedom for our team, where some other times we are in what we would refer to as full control and maybe overbearingly controlling. And we've got to recognize that there's a number of leadership styles out there. And we have to understand which one fits the current situation. We have leaders that are highly authoritative, and we refer to them often as quite visionary in nature. Another style is the affiliative one, where we engage with our team members on a continual basis. We've got the pace setting style as well, where we dictate, in a manner of speaking, the level, the speed that we're going at. And similarly, there's a coaching style that comes into play in times like this, just as much as there's a democratic style. And last but not least, believe it or not, what we refer to as a coercive style. Now, which style makes most sense in a virtual environment will depend on you and your team. I can tell you that there will be times that a coercive scenario might be required, just as much as that there are times when an authoritative one would be needed. But I can assure you that today is not the time for a highly democratic leadership style. Decisions have to be made, and they have to be made very quickly. We have to set the pace, we have to involve and engage people, and obviously we have to set a sense of authority and a vision for where we're going during these difficult times and these challenges that we're facing. Now, some of the traits for virtual leadership that are very common across people who succeed in these environments. First and foremost, they have the ability to respond before the change is forced upon them. So it's not about being clairvoyant and being able to see this happening, but rather than wait for the scenarios to unfold, they act first. They tend to be relationship builders. So during these difficult times, they're not waiting out what comes next. They're reaching out to their team, they're building those relationships, and they're very flexible and proactive. They tend to make sure that they listen, they engage, and they act as quickly as they can. They also tend to be open and quite tolerant to a variety of new ideas that are coming up there. And this is not about thinking outside of the box all the time, but rather about seeing, can we do things a little bit differently, and can we listen to that? We tend to react to change without rigidity. So the notion that change is constant is something that's known, and we're willing to react to it without setting the rules and guidelines and deadlines that might hold us back. And they certainly defy the status quo at all times. They're not willing to stick with the way things used to be and have to be, but rather what can we do differently at all times. And they most certainly plan for uncertainties. These are just some of the traits that exist there. But before I get into anything further, I want to address the fact that virtual teams can break down in a number of areas, and it's very easy to look inwards, and we have to look inwards when it comes to that. And that, where does virtual leadership break down? It's when people don't know where to go, and there's been a lot of that that's going on recently. We don't recognize where we are, and even when we do know where to go, we don't know how to get there. And this is where virtual leadership starts to come in very handy and becomes critical. At times we don't agree on the ends and the means, and we have to also step forward as leaders to make sure that we clarify that. We haven't identified the challenges that we're facing. We might think it's the economy, we might think it's a supply chain issue, we might even think it's the fact that we're at home and we can't engage our colleagues. Whatever it is, we have to be able to identify those. It also happens when we don't share the same picture of a certain situation, and that becomes a problem when the dynamic is a little bit different. And oftentimes, we don't know our roles and what we can do or where we're going to contribute. And this all leads to potential breakdown in virtual leadership, and it comes down to us. Now, I'm going to talk to you about something that we refer to as effective team clusters. And I'm not going to get into all of this. We simply don't have the time. When we talk about effective teams and something that we refer to as teamship, there are 4 particular clusters that are required to ensure success. The first of which is the direction cluster. We have what we call the skills cluster, one that's referred to as leadership, and last but not least, ethos. And while you will be receiving the definitions of those, our focus for today is on the direction cluster. You see, that's where everything begins. And as a leader, particularly a virtual environment, effective teams depends on everybody identifying with the vision. That success criteria is shared, the team is organized around that, and everybody's willing to change to make things happen. And most importantly, the team can overcome obstacles. And I assure you there's plenty, we know that. And that's what we have to deal with. So what are we looking at? There are 5 areas that we focus on when it comes to leadership in a virtual environment. But all of these, again, go back to starting with vision. That's the most important element. For those of us in leadership who have not set out the vision or revisited the vision with our teams, now is the time to do it. Your team will desperately be looking at this and hoping that you're able to clarify what the vision looks like, what might have changed in there. So what are the 5 elements that we're going to be looking at? First and foremost, it's productivity. That's a very critical area. Quality is a secondary area that we're going to be talking about. The third element is what we refer to as the team or company pulse. And fourth is relationship management. And last but not least is continuous learning. Now, for the purposes of this webinar, I'm going to focus on 3 particular areas. And those are productivity, quality, and relationship management. Now, don't get me wrong. It does not mean that the team or company pulse and continuous learning are not as important. They are. We simply don't have the time to cover all 5 of these in the time that we have allotted today. Continuous learning is an area that I want to address. Today, your teams, just like you as a leader, have been thrust into this world and may not have the necessary skills that we require in order to succeed. So I would urge you to have heart-to-heart conversations with your teams to recognize where there might be some gaps in there. Similarly, make sure that you keep your finger on the pulse of the organization and your teams. Recognize the emotional states that they're going through, how they feel, what their contribution looks like at all times. That's a critical one. Now, out of these 3, I'd like to start off with relationship management. And for us, relationship management starts with one critical element, and that's what we refer to as trust. In fact, trust is the backbone of every good relationship that's out there. For those of you that might be engineers or highly academic or certainly more utilize logic, we use an equation to define trust. And this might make it a little bit easier for us to understand or grasp. Trust is made up of 3 elements. First and foremost is credibility. How credible we are and we sound with our team will determine the level of trust that they're willing to give us. The second component is made up of intimacy, the type of relationship we have with them and how close we are to them. And that plays a very important role in the level of trust that they're willing to give us. The third element is reliability. Can they take us for our word? Are we reliable in everything that we've provided? So you see, for us to demonstrate trust to our teams, we have to make sure that we present ourselves as credible leaders. We have an intimate relationship and we're getting closer to them and we know them on a personal level and a professional level. And we have to demonstrate that they can rely on us at all times. It is those 3 that make up the trust equation. However, it is called an equation. And there is a denominator there that we refer to as self-orientation. This is our confidence in ourselves as individuals. And self-orientation can work against us in certain scenarios. And I can tell you today, self-orientation has been coming around with all the news that's circulating. Whether we believe it or not, we are being inundated with information out there. So as credible and intimate we are with them and reliable that we've proven ourselves to be, our people will have self-orientation potentially reduce that trust. And if their self-orientation is low, it keeps our trust levels high. I would actually urge you to run this as an exercise about each team member that you have and sit down and figure out, give yourself a score of 1 to 5, 5 being high and 1 being low, on how credible are you in their eyes, how intimate is the relationship, how reliable can you be, have you been with them, and what is potentially their level of self-orientation. That might give you a better idea on the level of trust that you have within that relationship. Now, in order to keep relationship management in mind, there's 3 things I would ask you to remember. First of which is framing. When we talk about framing, today there are team members that are receiving a sliver of information. And the reality is they don't have the full picture. For them, the scenario might look bleak, it might look optimistic, they might be unaware, and as I said earlier on, they might not even know where to go. And that's where vision starts to become important. So it's our responsibility as leaders to frame the situation and contextualize everything that's going on. So we make sure that the communication they receive it as intended. When you are framing, remember 3 things, and these are the 3 P's. Give it purpose, ensure there's a process that's defined, and the permission to move forward. For a lot of people today, they might be completely frozen out. They're unsure what to do. They're uncertain of what needs to happen, and it's our responsibility to give them that permission. As the old adage says, 1 ounce of pre-framing is worth more than a ton of reframing, or worse, post-framing. The other thing to remember is placing or placement when it comes to our relationships and managing that. It's about letting people know where we are as an organization, as a team, what we've covered and accomplished, and where we're headed. figure this out or consider this as a GPRS, and it's the guiding system that allows us to take them further. And they're looking to us for that. And last but not least is presence. Today, more than ever, they're going to count on us on presence. And this is a difficult scenario when it comes to virtual environments. So it's up to us to make sure that we give them full attention on what's going on here and now, be there for them, and certainly to listen intently. Now, on the notion of listening, for those of you that are unaware, there are 5 levels of listening that we talk about. The first of which is what everybody does, which is ignoring. This is what we do on a day-to-day basis, the news or the information, all the noise that's around us, we tend to push that out and we block it out. But for very often, for leaders just as much as team members, we tend to be in this pretending to listen phase. We're semi-engaged, we've got the body language down pat. If we're on a video conference call, we nod and we say, but we're pretending to listen. For some of us, we go into the third level of listening, which is selective listening. We've got information coming at us from various areas. We select the information that we want, the bits and pieces that make sense to us, and we chuck the others that are completely irrelevant. But then there's level 4, and that's attentive listening. And this is where we really start to engage individuals and we give them our undivided attention. However, there is a 5th level of listening, and that's what we refer to as empathic listening. This is about listening with the heart. It's about engaging people on an emotional level. And I can tell you once again that in a virtual environment, this is what your team is looking for. They want to ensure that while at times they recognize as a leader you might be selectively listening, that more importantly is you're going to be utilizing attentive listening at all times, and certainly empathic listening when it's required. These are the 5 levels, and we've got to be very mindful of where we are at different points in time. Now, let's address the second component that we talked about, which is productivity. Now, I know in times like this, we are worried. The numbers may not be coming in. Targets are not being achieved. In fact, there might be a freezing out of our business. All of this falls into productivity, but it also falls into the personal side of it. You see, we've got to always remember that there's a world of facts out there, which is what we refer to as the bottom line world. And this matters to every business. Don't get me wrong, I feel the same way. This is about production. It's about occupancy, capacity, sales, cost, targets. All of that falls into that. But there is the beyond the bottom line world of what we refer to as feelings. This is where anger, loyalty, joy, frustration, commitment all come in. And as leaders, it is our responsibility to create a balance between the two. It's ensuring that we recognize the world of facts as much as we recognize the world of feelings. How do we go about looking at productivity? There's a few tips that I want to leave with you in this segment here that you can do very quickly if you're not already doing them. The first of which is video conferencing for meetings. I would urge you to dump phones and phone calls and replace them with constantly video conference calls. Have weekly meetings at the very minimum, if not even daily meetings. Some of the leaders and the businesses that we've been talking about have found their daily updates extremely helpful. Their team feels energized and they feel that they can get on with their day knowing what's going on and simply seeing their colleagues and their boss in times like this. So make sure that all of your meetings have that capability. I would urge you to upskill or reskill. I want you to make sure that don't forget the skills that you want from your team members may not be skills that they have right now. It is our responsibility to make sure that our team members are growing. So engage them at that level, make sure that they're understanding what you need from them, and then how do we upskill them to get that done. Business results are just as important. I know that for a lot of businesses, they're not typical or keen on sharing all the details of their results. This would be the time to do so on an ongoing basis. Make sure that you share this as you might normally, but make sure that your team members are willing to share their business results as well. We can all learn from one another and we can create a collaborative ecosystem when it comes to that. I would make sure that you keep them updated. Now is not the time for the out of sight, out of mind scenario. It simply does not work. In fact, right now is the time to keep our team apprised of the situation and what's going on. I would urge you to schedule one-on-ones with your team. Just because you're having team meetings does not mean that the one-on-one discussions are not to be had. In fact, there are certain situations where they're absolutely necessary, like you would a face-to-face meeting where you might be calling them into your office or having a heart-to-heart conversation with them. And as bizarre as this might sound, I would ask you that on an ongoing basis, host some coffee breaks and lunches. These are what we refer to as video calls with really no agenda whatsoever, but simply to check up on our people, to have a nice conversation. If this is something that you used to do in the office, around the coffee machine or the water cooler, it's something that you ought to be doing virtually. It's comforting, it makes them realize that there's a human element here, and it engages them further. So, a few things we need to look at to improve the results when it comes to productivity. First and foremost, the vision has to have strategic goals. That's the only way it's going to come true. So I would ask you to revisit either the company vision or the team vision that you have and look for strategic goals within there. Do not look at the vision as this unattainable statement that we put on the walls of the office. Now's not the time for that. We have to get serious about the goals that are in there. Beyond that, you have to take those goals and you've got to break them down into team or individual goals. How they can contribute to that strategic goal and the subsequent vision is critical in times like this. Moreover, it's about giving them clear direction. That means creating meaningful work for everyone. If we're going to wait for people to come up with work for themselves, I can unfortunately tell you it's not going to happen. It is our responsibility as leaders to do that. Everyone ought to understand their role and what's expected from them. And again, this is our responsibility to do so. So be sure to define that where it might be unclear, particularly for those that required a live scenario rather than a virtual one. They needed to be in the office to get their job done. They, the most, potentially need some clarity on their roles. Everyone has to see their work with a greater context. What they might do might be small in their eyes, but they've got to understand how it reports backwards or relates backwards to the bigger picture of what they're trying to do. I would ask you to focus on the things that matter. Right now, there might be a lot of tasks that you used to do in the office. Now's not the time. It is only the tasks that matter and that yield results is where the focus needs to be. And align all the activities to maximize the performance at all levels. It is very, very important. Now, just because we're in a virtual environment does not mean that we sometimes fall into the bad habits that we have. And those bad habits sometimes is how we creep up on our people. I would ask and urge you that remember the amounts of pressures that people are on. There are people that might be ill in your teams or have family members that are suffering. There might be an economic struggles where a loved one or their spouse or whomever it might be might have lost their job. So I would urge you that as much as you want to creep into their lives and continue to micromanage and check up on them, now's not the time to do so. If we do our job right and we give them the direction and we give them the instructions that we have to, the job will get done on its own. So please do keep that in mind. Now, I want to address this notion of quality. Quality is a very tricky element because everyone has different standards that are out there. And it is very important for us to recognize what quality means to different people. But before I get into that, I want to address the concept of change. And I want to put that in the context of the fact that whether we like it or not, the virtual environment that we're in, just as much as the unknown that we're in dealing with this, with the virus and the changes that are happening around us, it is a change. And as with any change, there are 4 phases: denial, resistance, exploring, and commitment. I'm not going to get into denial because I really hope that nobody that you're dealing with right now is in a state of denial of what's going on and the changes that we're facing. But the area that I do want to address is resistance. And it's not resistance to change in general, it's resistance to the quality of work that we're going to produce. What do I mean by that? With your team sitting in their virtual environments, for many of them, they might be thinking, I'm going to wait this out. Things are bound to go back to normal. And I think this is where we need to step in as leaders and remind them that this is the new normal. How long it lasts, we don't know. Yes, there might be restrictions that are easing today, but that does not mean that we're going to go back to the norms that we had. This may very well be the new norm that we're in. So the resistance that they might have to changing, to adapting, and in fact, even adopting new ways, they've got to get over that resistance very quickly. And that's our job. As a leader, our responsibility is going to be moving them from resistance to the opportunity of exploring what does the new world look like? Where are some of the opportunities that we can uncover? And how can we continue to deliver quality work when it comes to the environments that we're in. What does quality mean? I often use the world of sport because obviously not just sport, but even the Olympics as the athletic greatness. When people reach the Olympics, obviously they are at the top of their game. And for those of you that are unaware, in gymnastics and be it the floor exercises or anything of the sort, the Olympic standard is 9.4. So for those of you that are familiar with that world of sport, you know that everybody's trying to reach that perfect 10. But what you may have not known is that the lowest possible score that you can get to be considered an Olympian is 9.4. It's not an 8 or 8.5 or 9. You're not cutting it. It's a 9.4. And if you can do better than that, the other 0.6 is made up of the risk we're willing to take. Another 0.2% is made up of originality. In the business world, this is what we refer to as innovation, potentially, or even invention. And then the other 0.2% is made up of virtuosity. So you see, for us to hit a perfect 10, we have to be operating at that bare minimum Olympic standard of 9.4. And then there's that 0.6 for people who go the extra mile, who take a little bit more risk and are original, and they add their own flair to things to make things happen. As leaders in a virtual environment, our responsibility is to make sure that every team member is operating at the bare minimum of Olympic standard 9.4 and going above and beyond. This is what we should be demanding of them. And I know this is something we may have not been demanding in a face-to-face environment, but in a virtual environment, it becomes even more relevant than before. So what does this all mean to us? If you think about this in the following matrix, excuse me, if we look at the world that we have, and quality applies on a number of levels. It applies to us as an organization, it applies to team dynamics, and it applies to individuals. So what I would ask you to do, as a matter of fact, is take a look at all three elements that we're talking about: relationship management, productivity, and quality. And I would ask you to measure what you're looking for as a company, what you're looking for from your team, and what you're looking for from individuals in each of these areas. And I would even ask you to go further and discuss this with your teams. Let them know on a transparent basis what it is that you're expecting from them in order to achieve these results on an ongoing basis. Now, from a business perspective, why is this all important? There are three areas that I want to take a look at when it comes to this here. The first of which is the results. I would ask you as a leader to reconsider a few things. The first and foremost is know your goals. Right now, if you had lofty goals for 2020 and you haven't taken the time to reassess and rewrite these numbers, something's gone wrong. You're waiting too long. Do it now. Know the goals that you want to achieve, and then from there, break it down to the tasks that you want to be able to get on. Spend time and energy only on these tasks and nothing else. That's where the effort is going to go. Now, beyond the results, we have to look at what we would refer to as overview, structure, and control. As I said earlier, this is not the time for out of sight, out of mind model, but rather it's for the insight in mind. That means we have to be visible, we have to be credible, we have to be engaged at all times. We have to create a structure for success. What do I mean by that? In some instances in your business, you might have to shuffle some of the people that you have. You have to give them tasks that were out of scope for them. You might have to train them on certain skill sets that they didn't expect to be doing today. But that's what the world calls for. So that means we have to take a quick overview of our business. We have to structure it and control it and ensure that we maintain control in order to succeed further. The third element that we have to look at for business success is time planning. Our time frames have changed dramatically. Whereas we might have had longer time frames, we had the opportunity to deliver. We might have been thinking in months and even years for certain projects. Our timelines have shrunk. And in fact, we might have been thrown for a loop with some of our clients where they're unable to make decisions. The current situation has frozen them out. They're unsure on how they're going to be able to deliver. So we have to recognize that our planning time frames have changed and we have to be able to manage accordingly. Always remember the elephant technique that we talk about when it comes to managing tasks. It's one bite at a time. And that's what we have to look at. For those of us that are trying to conquer the world and do so much, take it easy, slow it down, look at the tasks and do it on a one chunk at a time, and make use of your available time. It is amazing how much time is wasted today when we're not careful and we're not managing that time on a better basis. So we've got to be able to make sure that we maintain that and we remain mindful of what's going on. If we do this correctly, we're able to focus on our priorities, we're able to avoid the overload that's there, and most importantly, it's the ability to allocate our resources. Today, our resources might have changed. Countless leaders that we've talked to have had to go through job cuts, staff reductions, redundancies that are going on, furloughs that are happening, and our resources might be very, very limited in human capital. That's not to mention where financials and economics are taking a place also and having an impact. So please make sure that we keep that in mind as we go through. I want to open up to questions right now. I've noticed that a lot of them are coming through potentially the chat box. So what we'd like to do right now is any questions that are coming in, as a reminder to everyone, if you have questions that are coming up, you can do so in two particular ways. You can raise your hand, and Yoshi, our producer, will give you will unmute you so you can speak it. You can ask the question directly, and at the same time, I will take some of the questions that have come through in the chat box already. I noticed that some of you had said that I was too fast. I do apologize for that, Yemi. Rest assured that you will be receiving the video recording of this. As much as crazy as this sounds, I do get overly excited when I'm talking about a topic that I'm passionate about. So I apologize for that. And thankfully, you will have the recording and you'll be able to control that to go back to some of these points, as well as the handout that comes through there. A lot of great remarks. Thank you so much for those of you that have put some wonderful comments on there, and some questions that are in there. There is a question about scheduling one-on-ones, coffee breaks, and how can this be achieved? This is very simple. If you are using a platform with video conferencing, I would urge you that through calendar scheduling, send them a note and tell them it's a coffee break. Even do it with multiple team members at a time. Very recently, we hosted a lunch meeting with our team members where everybody at their home ordered lunch. We asked them to do it on the company account. Another client of ours did so by arranging the delivery of lunches to his team. And they hosted a lunch and learn, a lunch meeting where everybody was having lunch at the same time while going through a typical meeting. The coffee breaks, as I mentioned earlier, are very informal in nature. Call them up, everybody grab their cup of coffee, and let's chit chat like we would have in the office, 5-10 minutes at a time. For those of you that have WhatsApp video, Viber, anything else of the sort, you can easily do that in groups of the sort if you don't have Zoom. And Zoom does offer a free platform as well. You can do that there, or Skype, of course. But find something that works and make sure that you are in a visual perspective or virtual perspective on video. A few other questions coming in. A cost benefit, can you help identify new cost implications of leading virtual teams? Fantastic question that's there. I think it's still a little bit unknown. A lot of companies that we've been talking to, the first thought that they went through their mind is that if this is the new norm, we're going to have some great cost cutting in facilities. That if we're able to function via virtual environments, can we not get rid of our office space? Can we not get smaller office space? That could very well be the case. However, human beings have proven to be social animals. And for us, the engagement and interaction with others is critical for productivity. So we're not quite sure whether that'll have a positive impact down the road or not. Right now, we do think that there will be a new norm, virtual environments, co-working spaces that will become extremely popular. So there will be a change that's there. Today, working virtually through digitization, if your teams are ready, there's something that we talk about called the digital transformation personas. Do we know the personas of our teams when it comes to digital transformation? Are they ready? If they're not, or some of them are low adopters or have low trust in digitization and technology, there won't be much of a cost benefit there into moving into a virtual environment. the lag time for them to keep up will potentially be quite a problem. Let me just run through a few potential other questions. Excellent question about the variables that you should choose for measuring individual productivity. I think that is highly dependent on the individual that you have, but I will warn you, for a lot of us, productivity was always related to the job description, roles and responsibilities, and we might have set our KPIs based on that. And today, I would urge you to go from what we refer to as KPIs to what we refer to as KRAs, key results areas. In a virtual environment, and particularly when we're dealing in crisis mode, our focus is on results. So that relates to productivity. So let's take a look at the end of the day, end of the week, depending on how you've been dealing with your team members. And let's take a look at what is it that you were anticipating from them to deliver? How have they contributed to those strategic goals and subtasks that you've created for them? And ensure that that's what you're measuring. And for some of us, it might be very simple. The results are A, B, and C, and that's what I'm measuring. It's not necessarily the performance that I'm looking for, but rather the results that they're looking for. There's a question on getting the slides. When you receive the recording, it will have both the slides and the audio that you're hearing in the video. At the same time, you will receive the Top Tips booklet, which has all of these all of this information is going to be shared with you. Another question with regards to the recording. Yes, you will be receiving this after the session here. Is it more or less troublesome? There's a question, does leading a virtual team be more or less troublesome in terms of leadership, and how does the virtual team contribute to the office visibility? Excellent question also. I don't believe it's more troublesome. I believe it requires more skills that we're not familiar with. It requires engaging our teams in that virtual environment. It also ensures that, to the prior question, that productivity is at its peak, that people are not slacking off, that they're unsure or unaware of what they should be doing. I would urge you to make sure that as a leader, you upskill yourself of what's needed to lead a virtual team on an ongoing basis. What digital knowledge do you need? What technology do you need? How can you continue to engage them effectively in order to lead for that? If we are unaware of what we need to do as leaders to lead teams to a virtual environment, yes, it will be more troublesome. And office visibility is very important, hence the earlier comments about the coffee breaks, lunch breaks, and the video conferencing meetings, not telephone conferencing meetings that are going on. Thank you for the positive comments that are going on there. The slides, yes, as I mentioned, they will be shared with you. The design of the presentation, interestingly, is a collaborative work between us and MACTE Consulting. One of the programs we do deliver is called The Art of Virtual Presentation. You can talk to Clifford about that, which involves not just, of course, the presentation look itself, but also how do you present in a virtual environment is something that's there. There's a question on Sunday's asked, how do I upskill or reskill my staff when I cannot see them? Today, there is an enormous amount of virtual delivery that's taking place. MACTE and ourselves have actually converted so much of our collateral into what we call virtual instructor-led training, into webinars such as this one, into e-learning programs. There's a number of opportunities. Many of them are very cost-effective mechanisms to ensure that very quickly you get your teams up to speed on the skill sets that they require during these times. How effective is this amongst organization? I genuinely believe that today more than ever, companies are learning very quickly. Are we at an optimal level? No, I don't think so. I think there's a lot of learning that has to be done for many people, but for the most part, companies are adapting. Just as much as we are creatures of habit, we also know that when we are faced with change, we're able to adapt very, very quickly if we're able to do it the right way. Excuse me. There's another question on the likely the implication of virtual meetings on the cost of production compared to physical meetings. I can tell you firsthand from the clients that we're working with and our company, we're getting more done virtually. There's a lot more concerted effort. We get on a virtual call, a video call, anytime that we've needed to. We keep our Teams account open and ongoing. We've become a little bit more collaborative than people running around offices and trying to find people and so on. We are very mindful of one another's time, so we use our Microsoft Outlook to book time in people's agenda, so we know that they've got to get onto a video call at that point in time. So I do think that there is a value that happens there, and I think that it might have an implication on manpower. For retention, that'll really depend on the impact to business. Are we impacted in these in a negative way or a positive way when it comes to this here? I think that we definitely have to weigh what's going on. Thank you, Maxwell, for the comments and the fact that you feel that checking up on your teammates is an important one. I do think so. It's amazing the power that this could have. How do you measure KRA on a service basis when it's a service-based team? I think that in of itself, the results today for a service-oriented business are based on the engagement of your customers and the services that you're providing. So it's about finding out on a day-to-day basis, have we yielded results and feedback from our customers? How do they feel about the services that we're providing them? That might be a way for you to measure the results that you're having in a proper format. Another question, how do you get the best out of a team member to allow his personal life overshadow professional deliverables? I think that's a great opportunity. It really comes down to a heart-to-heart, virtually, if you're still in social distancing and lockdown or anything of the sort. But it is finding out and having a conversation about where their time is being spent and how can you help them balance that. For a lot of people today, I do not underestimate the challenges. The work from home from a lot of people has really thrust them into being teachers from home. They have to homeschool their children or take over online classes. They might have to be daycare and look after the children on top of the work environment. There's a lot that's going on. So I do ask you to be mindful of that and work with them on how can they rearrange their schedule. I talked about flexibility earlier. That's one of the traits of a virtual leader. And we have to make sure that we adhere to that as well. The recording again, Techno's asking that yes, you will be receiving this without a doubt. I'm trying to go through the Q&A box as quickly as possible, but there seems to be quite a lot of questions going. So thank you for that. Again, a team member that requires physical monitoring, but now they don't have that. I think again that's another heart-to-heart conversation with them, and it is about engaging them on an ongoing basis. At the end of the day, as a leader, you're looking to get the most out of your team. And for some individuals that might require monitoring, that might require do checks on what we call do checks in quality world, is that you ask them to do something, you check up on it, do something and check up on it. Clifford can fill you in more on that within our Quality Essentials program. But what I mean by that is that break down their tasks to much smaller tasks when they need that kind of monitoring. If you dump a massive list of what you want from them, it's not going to get done. If they needed monitoring in the physical space, you're not going to be able to do it in the virtual space. And that's where you need to micro-size the tasks that are there and apply the do check. Once it's done, you check with one another, and then they go on to the next piece of that. That's a very important element that's there. Yes, indeed, a very positive remark on MACTE from Bessie. Thank you very much. Glad to hear a lot of the positive insights. Great question from Andrew. And how do you ascertain full productivity from a virtual team? I think it starts by us redefining productivity before we can get to what we're referring to as full productivity. For many people who are hoping to get identical productivity from office space to virtual space, it's not going to happen overnight. As I said earlier, some of the skills that are required from your team are simply not there. For those of you that are leading salespeople, rest assured that they might be struggling right now. Some of your top salespeople, as a matter of fact, are frustrated because they're unable to have face-to-face meetings with their clients. They're trying to find different ways to engage them, and they may not be well skilled in teleselling. I can tell you, I come from a very rich sales background. I'm going back more than 20 years ago that I've spent in that. And today, if you've got a young sales team, the notion on selling over the phone is not something they're used to. They might be better at social selling. They're doing it face-to-face, but we have to go to some of our basics in professional telephone selling, in social selling if they're not doing that. These are skill sets that they may not very well have, and we need to reskill them, and that's what's going to lead to productivity. So I do urge you to make sure that you think about that and think of things from their perspective and where they might be struggling. There is a question on from Hedi about how do we identify team virtual personas. This is in reference to I mentioned we have actually a program and the tools that are called digital transformation personas. We actually have the ability of measuring people's digital transformation persona and where they are on their ability to adopt or have adopted technology and where they are on the level of trust in technology. That's a whole other topic. I know we wouldn't have time to get into it, but please do follow up, Hedi, with Clifford about that, and we can certainly talk about this a little bit more at that point in time. There's a question from Yemi on the most effective leadership style. Honestly, it's a combination of them today. I believe that in times like this, the authoritative style, the pace-setting style are two very powerful ones that come into play. They're very important right now. I would not utilize the democratic style. And in some instances, I hate to say it, but in virtual environments, even the coercive style might be necessary. You may have to coerce people to move forward into getting into this new world and delivering the results that you're looking for. How do you manage a team when they're digitally deficient? I think that's a great question, Yulu, and this is an opportunity for us to upskill them, find ways around that. I would urge you that get on a regular phone call with them and take them step by step with the technology that's needed. Get them to talk to a member of their family, a neighbor, somebody who can assist them with that, because it's necessity that we're able to do that. With regards to how to use Zoom, as a matter of fact, great question. There is actually a video that you can play from Zoom themselves on how to utilize all of the features that they have. External threats and impersonation in a virtual team, yes, it could happen. I think it's something that, again, the closer you are in collaboration, the better off you are in overcoming any of these obstacles that are there. Again, I'm trying to go through some of the questions as quickly as I can. There's a great question about, people who are self-existing. They're kind of, they're doing their own business. They mind everybody else that's out there. I think, again, you need to, these agents, while they manage their own business, if they are related to you, such as they are your distributors, they have a representation that's there. I think it's about recognizing how you're going to be able to get to the results you're looking for. At the end of the day, for business interruption that's happened for people, we're all on the same page. We want to get business done. We want to continue to produce. We want results. We want revenue. So it is about letting these agents know how you can support one another in order to benefit in the bottom line. So it's not about one or the other. It's not about them worrying about their business and your business. It's about how can you both bottom lines benefit from there. Upskilling required company-wide to improve our KRA, 100%. That could very well be the case, and we have to look at that. I'm glad that you've said that as a lesson learned. We have to look at that. Andrew, for certificates, please follow up with Clifford with regards to this here. Great question, Yutundi, with regards to the lockdown resulting in fears of loss of jobs and going virtual. I think this is, again, I mentioned this earlier, and you mentioned the lack of movement. That's the resistance. In fact, in some people, there's a denial that this might impact them. In some people, they might not be going forward in productivity and quality because they are fearful that what's the use, I might be out of a job. This is where the vision and communicating that vision becomes critical, because it is our responsibility to let them know what they can anticipate. And if there are job losses coming, it's our responsibility to let them know earlier rather than later. We have to make sure that we communicate this on an ongoing basis and we let them know. I think the notion of corporate confidentiality, great question, Samuel. A lot of the platforms that are out there today are very much in confidential space. Security and cybersecurity is a critical one. We recently put out a document on some working from home fundamentals. There's a couple of those that are out there, and you can ask Clifford for them. But these are about how, again, the standard operating procedures that you also expect from your team, that they find a quiet environment, that they ensure that what they're talking about remains in confidence. It's not shared with others just because they're virtual and they might be at home. They might have roommates, flatmates, or they might have family members around. The confidentiality element stays the same. Are there any other apps? Yes, there are. There are, again, a lot of people are using WebEx. They're using Cisco WebEx. They're using Zoom, of course. Skype for Business and Lynx is another one. There's a number of them that are out there. Lifesize, pardon me, is another one that's become very popular, and they're offering it free for 6 months. So there's a few that you can look at when it comes to this here. With the current drive to go virtual, how do we surmount the challenges of high cost of technology and power issues? I think that's a very good question. Look, right now, on a more business perspective, I think if you haven't already been having conversations with your landlords for businesses on reduction of rent and rent relief, you need to, and that offset of cost is going to be rerouted towards technology. But I would urge you to look for the least expensive and most economical ways. Many of them are using their laptops or computers at work. If they have a mobile phone, a lot of the tools that we're talking about here are mobile friendly. So it is no different than what they're using. And many of these tools are actually free of charge, which allows them to utilize that. Blue collar employees is a very big question that we have. Right now, you need to get a hold of them in the old fashioned way through phone calls. You need to create what we call a telephone web. One person calls 3 people, those 3 people call 3 more people, those 3 and call 3 more in order to reach the information that's out there. You need to utilize the old-fashioned channel with blue collars to get information out to them. If many of them, again, are on with mobile phones, send them an SMS every day or every 3 days. Make sure that you continue to engage them, that they recognize what's going on, and that while leadership, white collar, is not necessarily physically there, and they might be working and essential services and factories and anything of the sort, that does not mean that we stop our communication with them. It's very important to be able to do so. One day I see there's a question that hasn't been answered. I do apologize. I'm trying to go through the entire list here. James, you have a question with regards to the 4 elements on the effective leadership, the team clusters of direction, leadership, skills, and ethos. Please do reach out to Clifford afterwards. We have an entire program dedicated to the 4 clusters, and it is available as a virtual instructor-led program as well that we can get to you. Managing risk and necessary mitigation is an entire other topic, but it is an important topic, James, that we have to get through, definitely. I apologize that I'm not able to answer it now. Can we get the training material, Amara? Yes, you will be. And the end time is just about now. We are ready to wrap up, as a matter of fact, at this point in time. I do apologize for those of you that we were not able to get to your questions. If they've kept coming through, we do have a record of them, and we will make sure that Clifford and the team of MACTE gets to your questions, all of your questions, if we haven't answered them. If I may, I will leave you with these final remarks that at least are guiding principles for me. I'm a big fan of Pele, the football player, and he had said that success is no accident. It is hard work, perseverance, learning, studying, sacrifice, and most of all, love of what you are doing or learning to do. I would urge you to keep those words with you as we go through these challenging times and this crisis, and ensure that you are there physically in the virtual sense today for your teams and how we can engage them further. With that in mind, I will turn it back to Clifford if he wants to say any final remarks before we sign off on this webinar. Well, with that in mind, I want to thank everybody sincerely, and I wish you to stay safe and stay healthy. God bless, and we will get through this in due time. Thank you very much for joining us, and I hope that you've gotten some value out of the session. And thank you, Clifford, and to the team at MACTE for allowing me into the homes of Nigeria and the businesses of Nigeria. Thank you very much, everyone.